Once, the Alps stood tall, their peaks dusted with snow and glaciers slowly carving their way through the centuries. For generations, the towns below lived in awe of the mountains but knew their land was limited. Farming was confined to the valley floors where fertile soil was scarce, and the glaciers, like ancient guardians, prevented anyone from reaching the highland plateaus. Then something began to change. Over the years, the glaciers began to retreat, their ice melting faster with each passing year, and what was once a frozen, unreachable expanse began to reveal fertile soil, perfect for farming. At first, the farmers weren't sure, could this land be trusted? What would grow there? But the possibilities were too great to ignore. Slowly, they began planting barley, oats, and potatoes in the new uncovered fields. To their surprise, the land flourished. It was rich, vibrant, as if the mountains themselves had gifted it to them. The harvests grew, so did the town. New roads connected the valley to this newfound land, and homes sprung up where glaciers once stood. A small settlement, Alpenfield, quickly became a beacon of opportunity. Among the settlers was Marco, a young farmer who had always dreamed of more. With his neighbours, he planted apple orchards, vineyards, fields of herbs, creating a bounty that soon caught the attention of nearby towns. By the time the first harvest festival arrived, Alpenfield had transformed into a bustling centre of agriculture. The once quiet town became famous for its produce, drawing visitors from afar. Marco, now regarded as a visionary, stood in the town square, watching children play among the rows of sunflowers and apple trees. As he looked around, Marco realised that the mountain's retreat had not brought loss, it had given birth to something new. The land, once thought to be barren, had bloomed into a thriving community, and the glacier's retreat had opened the door to a new era. What was once a symbol of cold isolation had become a beacon of life and promise. And here we are in what will now be known as Alpenfield. This is episode 1 of a collaboration between Cloverpie and myself. Cloverpie, if you don't know him, creates beautiful, detailed builds here on YouTube, so go give him a follow if you're not subbed already. What we wanted to do was to create a story-driven European build with a substantial mountainous backdrop and plenty of detailing, of course. We'll be using the map Clover built. It's also called Alpenfield, and it was specifically created for this series. The map's based on the interlaken area of Switzerland, and it features much of the topography and infrastructure found in the area. The map itself comes with plenty of external connections and highway connectivity, so we can get a nice fast start on the build. I'll leave the link for the map, and Clover's map making video will be in the description as well, so do go check it out. Looking for your next game at great prices? With Instant Gaming, you can save up to 90% on PC, Xbox and PlayStation titles. No more waiting for sales or deals, get your game delivered instantly to your inbox. Instant access, no hidden fees, and a smooth, secure experience every time. From AAA releases to indie games, you can find thousands of games ready to play right now. Instant Gaming, great prices, no delays, why wait? Play today. And don't forget, it really does help support the channel. Okay, on with the game. Although this map is based on Switzerland, I am actually going to be kicking off things not too far away in the Principality of Liechtenstein. So Liechtenstein, if you've not heard of it, it is a tiny landlocked country tucked in between Switzerland and Austria. A German-speaking country, and it's a fairly wealthy one as well. It does owe much of its wealth to its status of a tax haven, though in recent years it's been trying to shake off that image. Economically, it's got one of the highest levels of GDP in the world. But mainly the reason I wanted to kick things off is I really like the layout of some of the farmland that I found over there. So I used the image overlay mod, and I really just wanted to give myself a little bit of a starting grid, and quite an unusual grid actually as well. Kind of jumped out at me when I was having a look about. So to help find inspiration, obviously Google Maps is always a go-to, but I started using Microsoft Flight Sim to try and find cool things to build as well, and gives me a good excuse to go flying as well, doesn't it? So I went and just hooked up some basic services to get started. I'm going to use some of the wind turbines, and I'm just going to hide them out at the corner of the map, and we'll come back to that and we'll get something decent built around it a little bit later on in the series. Same sort of idea for water and sewage services. I'm just going to plop some buildings down, and I don't want them in the middle of the town, so again it'll give me something to work on a wee bit later, and we can have a proper build on the back of it. Now you will see some water towers here. I mean, realistically I don't think you're going to get too many water towers in the Alps. There's plenty of fresh water, running off the mountains at the end of the day. So I popped in one of the new roundabouts from Cloverpie. quite a nice little addition that's going to form something of a centre of town. And I wanted to kick things off by getting the train in place. Of course, this area of the Rhine Valley has got a substantial train network, and I definitely want to get that in and really build the centre of the town around it. Well, as much as I can, nestled in beside that interchange. Now, I did nearly forget, I'd absolutely want to change the theme on this one, so I'm going to be using the Serenity map theme, and then for the grass, I'm going to be using Chameleon's grass theme as well, and it should give us a pretty nice lush effect on the background here. So as I extend out the rail, I'm going to try and run that over the existing highway networks and the new road that we put in here as well, of course. I do want to make the most of the land that we have here and really try and make this a relatively dense town centre. Now, it won't be super dense, it won't be particularly high density. The buildings that you find here in Switzerland, they've got a decent amount of space, between them on the whole. But this little parcel of land is definitely going to be a nice one to build on, and I think we can fit some commercial, maybe a little bit of industrial or service buildings in this little parcel. So we'll get the bridge in place and we'll get cracking on building out a little bit of a layout for the commercial part of the town. Cool, and I think that gives us a nice little starting point at least, and we've got a couple of areas that we can look to develop now. I'm going to quickly draw out something of a bit of an organic road layout. Get some curves in here. We'll have some kind of broken looking grids, and it will look a little bit higgledy-piggledy, which I'm absolutely fine with. I don't want too many straight roads really when it comes to the actual town. The layout in the real life version is pretty varied, and I do want that to reflect in the build today as well. So the way that the build is going to go is that we're going to plot down really almost all of the buildings here. I'm not entirely sure if I even zoned anything, to be honest. Zoning just simply isn't going to work. It's not going to give me the look that I'm looking to achieve in this type of build. Probably the biggest challenge that we have in an Alpine type build is the assets. Thought initially maybe some of the German assets would work pretty good, but in the end I actually used quite a lot of the Japanese low residential. For nothing else, they just give me a pitched roof. And really, when you look around the Alps and whatnot, almost all the buildings are pitched roofs, so that's always the first go-to when I was putting this together. That said, there will be some flat roofs. I mean, obviously you get flat roofs everywhere, but I wanted to try and keep them to a minimum, and you'll probably see me using them more so in some of the sort of medium density buildings, simply because there's not that asset variation just yet. But we do have good choices here, and I think we've got enough to kind of go on and at least give the look that I'm looking to try and achieve come the end. I think when it comes to the town centre, I do want some big sort of signature type buildings and kind of statement buildings. So my thinking here is to really just focus the higher density assets around the town centre. That kind of obviously makes sense. However, that said, I don't really want any big high-rise buildings, and it's not to say that high-rise buildings don't exist. In that part of the world they do, but there's just not that many of them, and they tend to be more 3-4 story size buildings, that kind of thing. So really, the area does have a pretty decent variety of architectural styles, and I want to reflect that along the main street, if you like, in this town. So I'm going to use a good mix of some vanilla assets, but plenty of the UK ones. I did like the fire station asset here. Obviously it's too big, so I'm going to be using Starq's ploppable assets, and it means that I can get this stuff right up against the main street here, which is pretty nice. I won't be using too much in the way of French assets, but I do like that small crematorium one. It's a nice little asset that you can just kind of slot in lots and lots of different builds, and it's very welcome to have an asset with such a small footprint. So I'll continue to mix and match and grab whatever assets I reckon are going to be looking the part. Majority of them will be functional, but here and there where space is limited, I will use some of the non-functional ploppable ones, and then we can build around it. I think the real nice part of this build is that we can now pick and choose various different assets from different asset packs, and we can kind of mush them together and get the style that we want. So here you see that we're using I think it's the UK hotel, and then we've got the German fire station right up against it. And again, I'm just wanting anything really with a pitched roof, and we chuck it together. Having a look on the Google Maps, I did find a little train station up here in the Alps that has something of a little bus depot, collection of bus stops, in the front of it. Just pretty much the same layout that I did there. Looks really nice. I definitely wanted to put that in the build as well. Now, I did use a one-way system there, but people came and parked on it, so I'll be changing that road in just a minute or two. So we'll get inventive with some of the assets here, and what I want to do is to create a little custom block. So we'll just use 3 of these, sling them all together, and it gives a nice little effect. Another new asset, and that is the new car parking one. I love this. This will be going in so many builds. It's absolutely perfect. And you would want some decent parking really beside the train station. You'd expect that to get some pretty decent use. So I'm going to slot it in there, and I'm going to have it right up against the rail networks, which looks nice. Around the back of the town, I want to provide a little bit of parking. You might expect to see that maybe around the back of the hotels and whatnot, so we'll get that squeezed in. And out towards the back of the town, I do want to ramp up the residential density a bit, and we'll use some of the medium stuff. And again, I'll be using the Japanese assets packs as well. Quite generic in a good way. You can use them in lots of builds of these, and I want to create little blocks. They are a little bit white, perhaps. The nice thing is that you can recolor these, so I'll be toning down the whiteness a little bit on this build in a few minutes. So let's quickly get this little gap filled, and we'll pop in a few more choice assets here. Now this exposed gable end is going to give me a nice excuse to get Wee Man in the build. Let's fire him on. And in case you wonder what he's going to be looking at, he's going to be keeping a keen eye on this bird across the road. And such a lovely decal that as well, isn't it? Look at the detail on that. It's beautiful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue in that vein. I'm going to get a few more of the vanilla EU assets because, again, I do like the pitched roofs. We're going to bulk it out with a little bit more commercial, and we'll add a little bit of detail in terms of giving a bit of public space and maybe a little mini plaza or town square or whatever as well. In terms of the residential, I don't want to have it too tightly packed or too tight density wise, so I'm going to be extending out, and I'm going to be doing the first of the low density buildings as well. Low density buildings, again, we've made a little bit of a start towards the back of the town, and really I'm just going to be using a lot of similar assets to build that out. Good variation in the Japanese pack again, so we'll be utilising all of the stuff that's going to be fitting in. So what I'll do at this point is that I'll pop on a quick time lapse, we'll get all of the plopping of the buildings done, and then what we can do is we can get started on some of the agricultural stuff that's going to give this area a really unique look. So, please enjoy the music, and I'll catch up with you in a couple of minutes. I reckon we're off to an absolute beautiful start here, and that background with the mountains in the background, just stunning. Bit of vegetation obviously makes a bit of a difference, you know, once we have it in, and I think we've got a fairly natural and realistic looking town. I'm super happy with that, really happy with that. So revisiting the agricultural land here, I'm going to be using net lanes to divide the sections up, and it's a really unique pattern. I wonder what the story is behind it, but essentially it's going to be sort of breaking up into parallelograms, and then within that I'm going to be splitting them down the middle with the net lanes, and then I'm going to be able to kind of create a bit of a frame, and that's going to use the basis for the orientation of the surfaces that I'm going to be using. I'll be using Broman's farming pack. We used this just briefly on the UK build a couple of weeks ago, and really this is the first time I've actually did a proper farming build. I think the vanilla farming obviously leaves an awful lot to be desired, and I really didn't have much of an interest in building that out, to be honest with you. But these surfaces have changed everything. I think you can get really creative with it. There's lots and lots of options, and if you don't have that mod, I certainly recommend you go have a look at it. So I want to be consistent with the angles here, and I'll use, I think, 60-degree angles in all of these. That'll give us a nice bit of consistency, and you see me put some of these lines in. I don't need all of them, they are just guidelines. I'll be using different shapes and sizes. Well, it's going to be the same shapes, but I'll be using different sizes as we actually build out the individual fields. Earlier I did go ahead and sort out some of the bus lanes, and we can see that the public transit networks are all up and running and all working as intended. We don't need as many buses though, so we can get rid of some of them. And these are just going to be external connections for now, of course. We don't have any other destination on the map. So as I crack on with the fields themselves, you're going to see me pulling out the surfaces out to the road, and the reason why we're doing that is to try and get the orientation of the surfaces just the way I want. So I want them sort of vertical, if you like, running straight down, basically alongside the road. And I want the other ones to be running at that 60-degree angle, which will basically follow the angle of the net lanes that we put in earlier on. So you can see that we get a nice contrast, not just in the colours, but also in the shapes and the orientation of the lines. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to use a pretty good variation in terms of the surfaces, and we'll just mix and match, and we'll just try and get it looking a little bit different and give that impression really that we have various different crops on the go and various different things being ploughed. As you can probably imagine, this took a good amount of time to put in place, and I think it was just a case of getting my head around the different angles that I need to do, you know, for different fields. It did get quite a bit quicker once I got into the build itself, and the best plan of action for doing this was to do one section, do it, you know, from the top to the bottom, do the whole row, and then move on to the next one. And it means that you don't have to think too hard about the different angles that you're using. So I think you've seen enough of kind of how it's done and how the angles and orientations are done on these decals. What I'll do just now is I'll skip it on, and we can have a quick look and see how it panned out. And how about that? That's looking pretty cool in the background, isn't it? So nice variation of different greens and browns. Very light on the red and the blue ones, but they do exist, you know, on the real life ones. There is some blue looking fields on there, but I am super happy with that. And the nice thing is that we don't need a massive amount of detail, you know, to bring it to life. I am going to use a couple of functional assets here, but not a huge amount. You know, density wise, it's fairly spaced out in the real life one, and I would like to reflect that on this build here today as well. But yeah, that looks cool, doesn't it? And one other visual setting that I wanted to change was I wanted to just change the blue and the green colour on the water. I think I want this to be a nice sort of aqua blue, you know, sort of alpine looking thing. So I'm gonna get that changed just quickly now before I forget. So from a detailing point of view, all I'm going to do is I'm going to extend out the farming part of it and just delete the fence and redraw it back in, taking up the whole area. And a little bit later on, I'm going to add a couple of greenhouses, and we'll get some bit of vegetation in here as well. So when I was having a fly about on Flight Sim and Google Maps, I noticed it was a reasonable bit of industry actually in the Swiss part of the Alps. So what I wanted to do was to sort of build along the river, and this looks sort of fairly typical. There's quite a few examples I could find where they have, you know, industrial estates and industrial buildings along the water. And I think it makes sense to put some of that water treatment stuff down here as well. does mean potentially I can get rid of the other one that I plopped down at the beginning of the episode as well. So I'm going to use the Japanese one. Again, I like the size and the scale of that one, and I'm going to extend it out by using some surfaces, some path networks with key walls, and some of the vanilla assets here as well. That'll give us a pretty good basis to kick things off. I would like to move it away from the farmyard a little bit, so I'm going to create a little bit of a barrier, and we're going to put a few trees in here, and we'll basically hide it. And once we've got some of the surfaces in and around here, it's going to give us an opportunity to run a road or two, and then we can build out a little bit of industrial. And there is, as I say, a fair bit of industrial in this Rhine Valley. All of the industrial buildings I'm going to use will be functional here, and I'm just going to try and find the size of assets that's just going to fill the gap and try and push it up against the path the best that we can. And I think we can just filter that by asset size, so times 2, times 3, times 4, and we'll just get it filled in. And that looks like a pretty nice little area on its own already. I do want to provide a little bit of car parking, and it's not going to be anything major, but we'll get that detailed up. I will need to be a custom one here because it's a bit of an awkward shape. I reckon once we've got these surfaces in, that looks a bit more like it, doesn't it? Excellent. And then again, we've got some detailing opportunity a little bit later on. I'm not going to go super mad with the detailing, but I think we will need some decals here because it's just too clean, really, isn't it? I do want to expand on here in later episodes. I'm just going to run the roads out, and it'll be a little reminder that we can maybe fill this gap up with some more development later down the line. For this episode, I think what I'll be doing is really just mainly putting it in as a bit of a vegetation type area, and that will do the trick for just now. We get loads of options later on. So I reckon we are ready for some detailing. And the detailing that I'll be looking to do, I kind of mentioned it earlier on, but I definitely want to bulk out the vegetation. I want to break up the fields a little bit. They are a little bit flat looking, which is fine. But I want to add a couple of kind of bushes and hedges and a little bit of tree action on there as well. Don't want to go too mad though. I definitely want to keep the overall shape of the fields. So we'll add a bit of vegetation around the town, and we'll bulk out along the water's edge as well. The opportunities in terms of the detailing in the town is really just to kind of give some shared civic areas, you know, and maybe small plazas and that kind of stuff. So leave it with me. Let's have a quick look at the detailing, and I'll catch up with you for a few shots at the end. think we've ended up with a really beautiful start to the series here. Really happy with how this town turned out. I think we've got plenty going on in terms of interest. And we've got public transit sorted, we've got a beautiful backdrop, we've got little sort of commercial and nice residential areas, plenty of agriculture, and there's going to be plenty of agriculture actually in this build as it goes along. It's a really big part of the landscape in this part of the world. Do let me know what you think of this type of video. Definitely something a little bit different, you know, with the story driven stuff, and let me know if you want to see more of Microsoft Flight Sim as well. I quite enjoyed having a look through and seeing what we could do build wise, you know, using that software. I reckon I'll probably be using it a little bit more in the future to kind of run through the inspiration stuff. It does help kind of bring it to life, and it looks a little bit better than Google Maps, doesn't it? If you want to get hold of the game save, this one is available for our Patreon members. Thanks once more again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring the video. Don't forget guys, if you are buying a game, do it through that link, it does help the channel. I'll leave it for now. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.